Hi, Cree, and this is my channel, The Midnight Librarian, and today I will be talking about my review of Bad Cree by Jessica Johns. So for some of you who've been watching my videos for a bit, you know that I've already been talking about this, particularly if you've seen my April wrap up. And I think I said in there that I wasn't going to do a review for this, but after kind of thinking about it for a little bit, as well as checking my views for some of my videos, a lot of my views, I know that with other booktubers, like, reviews tend to be like the least popular videos, but mine are my reviews. Like, those are the ones people tend to go to. Particularly when it comes to books by Indigenous authors. I don't know how to feel about that. I'm happy that people are coming to my videos to seek out more information about Indigenous authored books. But at the same time, I don't want to be trapped within that. Just because I'm an Indigenous booktuber doesn't necessarily mean that I'm the one and only place for you to go to learn about Indigenous books. I highly suggest you do your own education and seek out other voices. So it's just something I don't want to be trapped into. But I feel like I also need to do my part and highlight Indigenous voices. So Jessica Johns is a Nahia auntie and a member of the Sucker Creek First Nation in Treaty 8 territory in northern Alberta. And it's been a while since I've done a review for an Indigenous authored book, so let me just say that I guess in a general sense this would be considered a own voices review. However, please note that Indigenous folks are not monolithic. We each have, like, every tribe, nation, people, rancheria has its own stories, has its own practices, has its own history. We are not monolithic. We are individuals, even when it comes down to even the families within each tribe, nation, and rancheria and peoples. Like, we are not monolithic. It's hard for me to say that this is own voices because it doesn't feel own voices. I am not a member of the Sucker Creek Nation in Treaty 8. I'm a coastal Yurok in Wiyot territory in California. So yeah, but let's go ahead and get into the review of this. So Bad Cree by Jessica Johns. I'll go ahead and read you the synopsis. In this gripping horror-laced debut, a Cree woman's dreams lead her to a perilous journey that forces her to confront the toll of a legacy of violence on her family, her community, and the land they call home. When Mackenzie wakes up with a crow's head in her hands, she panics. Only moments earlier, she had been fending off masses of birds in a snow-covered forest. In bed, she blinks and the head disappears. Night after night, Mackenzie's dreams return her to a memory from before her sister Sabrina's untimely death. A weekend at the family's lakefront campsite, long obscured by a fog of guilt, but when the waking world starts closing in too, a murder of crows stalks her around the city. She emerges retching water from a nightmare of drowning, and she gets threatening text messages from someone claiming to be Sabrina. Mackenzie knows this is more than she can handle alone. Traveling north to her rural hometown in Alberta, she finds her family still grappling with the same grief she ran away to Vancouver to escape. They welcome her back, but their shaky reunion only seems to intensify her dreams and make them more dangerous. What really happened that night at the lake, and what did it have to do with Sabrina's death? Only a Bad Cree would put their family at risk, but what if whatever has been calling Mackenzie home was within her all along? John's visceral writing takes us from dreams to a waking nightmare and asks us to find the universal in the personal, uncovering shame, doubt, and denial as she tracks the family's attempts to come to grips with loss. So I don't think I read that whole thing before I actually read this book. So if you've seen my April wrap-up or other videos where I've talked about this book in particular, you'll know that about the first half of this book I felt was very hard for me to get through. Not because of the content warnings, which I will go, like, I ask you to go ahead and look into before you read this, but because it felt fairly meandering. We do get Mackenzie going through her nightmares as she's living in Vancouver, away from her family home in Alberta in the High Plains. High Prairie? I forget which one. I think it's High Prairie. But ultimately, it felt kind of meandering in terms of her trying to figure out what she wants to do. It takes her friend, I forget what her friend's name is, Jolie. So Jolie is Mackenzie's friend. They're non-binary, which is great. But at the same time, they're only in this book for about half, like, for as long as Mackenzie's in Vancouver. And once she's out of Vancouver, we don't hear much about Jolie at all. So they're kind of, it feels to me like a throwaway character in that they didn't actually really need to be there. But I mean, I guess I'm happy they're there. Jolie was like, I don't know, it felt like Jolie was going to be more of an essential character. When really it was them that convinced them to go back home. Convinced Mackenzie to go back home. And because Mackenzie was fighting it. There was a bunch of like grief and like this nervousness and guilt that she didn't go back for Sabrina's funeral, that she doesn't really call her mom, doesn't really call her remaining sister, because she doesn't want to talk about that grief. She doesn't want to keep experiencing that grief of losing Sabrina. So she does talk to her aunties, and ultimately not only is it a bit of Jolie, but it's also her aunties that say, go home, come home, let us help you. And when Mackenzie does finally go home, it's still more of this like, she's not telling them everything. She thought that she was just going to be cured from going home. And so it was this very much like, to me, this kind of dragging, like, what are you doing? Essence that had me debating if I should just DNF this. Like, the whole time I was like, okay, I think I need to put a pause on this, or I think I need to DNF it. And I kept thinking, I'll get back to it at some point. You see the piles, like, when would I ever get back to it? And so that, there was a bit of that was like, no, you should keep reading. There was something about this book that made me want to keep reading it out of fear that I would never pick it up again. Despite me saying like, I'll pick it up later. It was only like a soft DNF. It's not like a hard DNF. So I kept reading it. It took a while for me to get to the halfway point, and even just a little beyond the halfway point, it was that same feeling of just like, what is she doing? And then one night, for some reason, it was like it probably was just a little over the halfway point, and I read the rest of the book all in that night. It really picked up, and it was probably about the time Mackenzie finally like let everything out. Just like telling her family, her mom, her aunties, her sister, her cousin that yes, I'm still having these dreams. Yes, they're freaking me out. I don't know what this is. And then for her cousin to mention what it could be. I'm not repeating it. I don't want that juju. Because it's one of those things that I feel like if you say it out loud that it's going to come to you. So I'm not doing that. That's when it finally felt like it was picking up. I'm like, finally, everything's out. Everyone can help. And there was still secrets being kept. There was still like this element of, which felt reasonable to me, of the aunties and Mackenzie's mom not wanting to keep them safe. Wanting to know for sure what was going on. But it still made sense to me. There is great discussions in here, I feel like, particularly when it comes to, yes, the possible prosperity that an oil boom can bring to a town, but also the aftermath of when that oil boom is no longer booming, when those people leave, when the industry leaves, of like how what happens when that industry is no longer there, giving jobs, giving to the community, and having ultimately how are they helping the community then, of these empty buildings, of families having to pick up and move because there's no longer jobs in the area. So I thought that was a really interesting discussion, particularly how it came about, in terms of what's happening to Mackenzie. Ultimately, I thought that was a really interesting discussion of how the industry, particularly the oil industry, created greed and ultimately created something else that is affecting this family. I thought that was a really, really good discussion, and something that happens not only with the oil industry, but with other industries as well, the logging industry, the mining industry, etc. Because ultimately, all of these industries are affecting minorities, Indigenous people in particular. We're seeing that in Alaska with mining. We are seeing that here locally with logging. Not so much now. We have seen it. But we're also seeing it with universities and knowledge-based exploitation. So, but it also brings particularly with the oil industry, it's also bringing up other aspects of MMIP. I haven't read this book yet, but Highway of Tears. We see that. So, and the connection between those two. Very, very good discussions, I feel like, of that, and ultimately what's happening. There is also discussion on grief and loss. Mackenzie does end up talking to her remaining sister, who was Sabrina's twin, and how they ultimately felt about Mackenzie missing the funeral, about what ended up happening, about the mother's grief, about the cousin's grief. We talk about grief, which I think is fantastic because it's a very important topic and something that I think is really hard for people to talk about. It is hard. Coming from experience of losing my own brother in 2018, it is something that's hard to talk about, and it is something that won't just go away even after you talk about it. Like, I feel like my mom and I talk about it in a fairly healthy way. It's also just getting started, right, of normalizing talking about the grief, so, and loss. The creepiness of the dreams, right? So I've had some scary dreams before, nightmares. That's one of the reasons why I got Danny from... Oh my god, I'm so sorry. It's been so long since I've watched her videos, and I think it's been a while since she's actually put any videos up. But I think it's Thunderbird Woman Reads. But I'll link her Instagram where she sells dream catchers. It's one of the reasons why I got one of Danny's dream catchers, is because I was having nightmares. Also because it's beautiful, and that one particularly called out to me. But it's one of the reasons why I got them, because I got it because I was having nightmares. I was having nightmares to the point where, I was afraid to go back to sleep. I was afraid to sleep in general. I'm typically a night owl anyway, but with my partner being who he is and what he does, it's kind of hard to do that if I want to enjoy his company too and go enjoy what he does with him and waking up at an ungodly hour. I like the dream aspects of it really are something, because it connected me with, it got me with that too. So there's so much in this book that I connected with. The dreams, the loss of a sibling, the talk of grief and loss when it comes to that sibling, with other siblings as well as your family. I love the aunties in here. They were a fun aspect of this. I thought that was also really cool, just because there are, unfortunately, my blood relative aunties are gone. But I still have aunties in my community, and that's something that I really enjoyed too, because it's something that is just kind of accepted, I feel like, within Indigenous communities, is that even if they're not blood related, there are people, mentors in our lives that are still considered aunties, because they look out for us in such a way. So that I really loved in here too, even though they were blood related, but you get it. So the end broke me. So I finished I think it just a little, it must have been like that. I had that much. I finished that bit all in one night. And at the very end, it was just, God, it got me. So there was elements of it where I was bawling anyway, because it was Mackenzie talking to her remaining sister, her cousin, her mom, about the loss of Sabrina. But it was that had got me. That had me crying because I related. But it was also the very end of that confirmation that Sabrina was okay in the end. I mean, she was still gone, but she was okay, if that makes sense. I don't want to spoil it. But there was that confirmation, and it was... I can feel myself tearing up now. I can feel my voice wavering now, even talking about it, of that confirmation that they're fine afterwards. Whew. See? Whew. But yeah, that got me so hard. And that, yeah. Whew. But yeah, and so that was obviously with like me getting like that now. When I finished it that night, bawling, completely bawling. Like I keep saying, I was trying not to hyperventilate, mostly because I was trying to keep quiet, because I wasn't trying to wake Brad up. But I remember like scrounging around for like some kind of towel, or I think I found a washcloth, and was just like, had it pressed to my eyes, and was just silently going, trying not to wake Brad up, trying not to hyperventilate, taking deep, slow breaths to try to keep from hyperventilating. It was so good. Oh my God. Yeah, I love that. I love this book overall. I can't give it a 5 stars just because of how it made me feel in the first half of the book, of this the slow meanderingness of it. But ultimately did give this 4.5 stars. Really did enjoy it by the end. So I do highly suggest it. Yeah. So that is my review of Bad Cree by Jessica Johns. My battery is flashing at me, so I'm trying to finish this up, so I apologize if I kind of am speedrunning this towards the end. But yeah, is there a crow emoji? Let's put a crow emoji. It makes more sense. If you made it this far, be sure to like this video if you have yet to do so. If you want to see more of me, hit the subscribe button. Otherwise, I hope that you are in the mental mindset to enjoy your reading. I will see you in another video very soon. Chew.